In this tutorial, I'm going to go over the basic stitches that you will need to start crocheting. The first thing you're going to want to do is get yarn. So I suggest either getting a big twist, a red heart, a Karen, some type of yarn that is a 4 medium weight. You can always look right on the label. You don't need to get this exact brand, but just get a regular yarn that's not too fluffy, furry, fuzzy, thick. You want to just get a regular simple 4 weight yarn in a color that you can see well. If you choose black or something really dark, it's going to be harder for you to see the stitches. So here on your yarn label, when you're yarn shopping, you are going to be able to look here on the label. And I suggest a medium 4 weight yarn is the best for beginners. All right, the thicker the yarn, the bigger the number, and the smaller the number, the smaller the yarn is going to be. It's going to be very difficult for new beginner crocheters to work with super chunky yarn or super thin yarn, so get a nice medium weight for yarn. Here, if you're knitting, then here's a suggestion for your size knitting needles, and if you're crocheting, here are some suggestions for the size of the hook to use for this yarn. Now, this is saying that you can use anything from an 8 to a 5, but this is just a suggestion. Okay, I'm using a 6 millimeter hook. So pay attention to this on your yarn label when you're buying yarn. And then this is going to give you a suggestion of how many skeins to look for to buy if you're doing a project. So if you're making a smaller project, you may only need 1 skein. And then the larger project, you're going to need more yarn. So take note of this and buy the yarn that you need for your project. There's one more thing you want to look for, and that is this lot number. This correlates to the dye that they use to make this particular color for this day, or whenever they were processing this yarn color for that day. This is the lot number that goes with this color for this day. Now, you can buy other colors of the same brand, same colorway, which is cornflower blue, but if this number is different, the shade might be slightly different. So take note of that if you're buying multiple skeins, to always check and make sure you get the same lot number if possible. That will ensure that you will have the same color. Now, some yarns, even though they have the same lot number, the shade is slightly different. So look for that if you need multiple skeins of yarn for a project to get the same lot number. All right, let's get on with the tutorial. So now that we have chosen our yarn, and this is an acrylic yarn, we're going to get our hook again. You can see what size hook you're going to need when you buy your yarn for your project. You might need a measuring tape for your project. You might need, especially if you're a beginner, these are going to be your best friends. These are stitch markers. These are going to designate your first stitch, your last stitch, or they might help you with counting. If you have a blanket and you might want to mark every 50 stitches or every 100 stitches. So these are really helpful for you. And then you're always going to need a pair of scissors. You're also going to need a darning needle to weave in your ends. We're going to take our hook and we're going to take our yarn. So what we're going to do first is called a slip knot. So I like to hold it over my left hand. I am right-handed. So just hold it over your left hand if you're right-handed, and you're just going to wrap it around your fingers to make a circle, and you're going to put your yarn between the circle and pull through. It's that easy. Okay, so that is your slip knot right here. This is your tail. You're always going to want to make sure that you have a long tail to sew in your ends. Don't cut your tail too short because that's going to make it hard on you. So make sure you have 5-6 inches at least for your tail. All right, so once we have our slip knot here, we're going to insert our hook into here, and we're going to tighten it a little bit just by pulling, and we're not going to make it too tight. We always want to make sure that our hook slides in and out of here very easily. We're not going to make it super tight and hard to pull. All right, so I regulate my tension, which is how tight or loose my stitches are, by doing the scissor holds right here with this hand. And then I also hold my tail here so that I'm pulling these fingers like this to give myself some nice tension in between here to work with. So I'm scissoring here, that's controlling my yarn that's going to my skein. And then I'm holding my tail, and that helps me to hold on to my work. So when you hear me mention tension, that is how tight or loose your stitches are. And you want them to be consistent. All right, so when you're a beginner, it will be hard for you to keep consistent tension, but the more you practice, the better you will be at it. All right, so we're going to do a chain. So to do a chain, you're gonna put your hook down. You're gonna hook your yarn, and you're going to pull it through that circle, that slip knot. So the slip knot is on our hook. We're going to pull it through the slip knot, just like that. And again, everything is nice and loose. Nothing is too tight. All right, we're going to go down around the yarn, hook your yarn, pull through the loop. Those are making chains. So just practice doing that, where you just pull that loop through. So that is making a chain. So you go down, loop, pull through, down, loop, pull through. All right, this is called yarn over, pull through. Yarn over, pull through. So just keep practicing making chains until you can look at your chains and they're nice and consistent, and you don't have some that are too tight or some that are too loose. And if you ever have to go back, you simply take your hook out and just pull your yarn, and that undoes that stitch. Now, if you look at these stitches, they are going to look like V's. Those are stitches. We're not counting this knot that we made. We're not going to try to put a stitch into anything into here, right? So this is our first stitch right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so we've got 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do another one. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, in our little sample here. And we're going to do one more, and that's going to count as our turning chain. So we do one extra. All right, so here is our chain that we have made. So now to do our first row, we're not going to be turning our work yet. We're going to simply work into these stitches that we made, which is our foundation chain. And the loop that is on our hook, we are not going to be counting this loop that is on our hook. Okay, so these loops right here, if we count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we've got 11 chains right here. What we're going to do is we're not going to go into this first one. We're not going to go into this first V. We're going to skip that one. We're going to be going into this V right here, the second V in our chain. So we're skipping this one and we're going into this V. All right, to do that, we're going to pull our hook a little towards us, and we're going to go into the center of this V right here. Now, we're not only going to go into the first loop. That is going to make your work very loose and it's going to stretch out. I always go right into that center of the V and straight through. So I am picking up the entire stitch there. If you turn it sideways, you can see 2 parts. So you are picking up that back loop. So to identify your V's, just look for that V stitch here. Then you're going to go right into the center. Okay, so let's start doing our row 1. So we're going to skip over the first V, which is this one right here. We're going to skip over that first V. We're not going to go into that very first stitch. That was number 11. We're going to go into this one, which is the second chain from our hook, and it's number 10 in this row. So we're going to go right into the center here. So insert your hook. Make sure that you're getting 2 pieces of yarn here. You're not just going into the top. That'll make your stitches stretch. You're going right into the center. All right, so just turn and make sure you've got 2 pieces of yarn there. You're getting the whole stitch. Hook our yarn. We're going to pull it through that stitch. Pull it up a little bit. And then we're going to yarn over and pull it through those 2 loops. That is a single crochet. So for the next stitch, we're going to go right into the center. Again, make sure you're picking up that back bump there. You're going to yarn over, pull your hook through that stitch and up a little bit. You're going to yarn over and pull it through those 2 loops. Okay, we've done 2 single crochets. So we're going to insert our hook here, yarn over, pull up that loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Insert your hook into the center of that stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So that is single crochet. Insert your hook, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So continue doing that, inserting your hook, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. So continue doing that all the way down until you get all of your stitches. If at any time I'm going too fast, you can always stop the video and catch up, and you can always adjust the speed of the video in settings. Okay, here is our last V. Okay, here was our slip knot right here. This bump is our slip knot. And here's our last V. This is our first stitch that we did. You want to make sure that you go in there. So you're going right into here, again, right into the center. And make sure you're getting those 2 pieces, 2 strands of yarn there. Yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So that is a row of single crochets, and it's okay if it's curling up, it will do that. All right, now let's count our stitches to make sure that we have 10. And we made 11 stitches because that very end stitch is our turning chain. That does not count. Okay, when we were doing our very first single crochet in there, we needed to go up and do an extra stitch. All right, so let's count the V's here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if we would have only done 10 chains across and then turned and went back, we'd have ended up with 9. So that's why we did 1 extra stitch. So we would have 10. So we count our V's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we know that we have 10 stitches going across. Now for you beginners, you might want to put a stitch marker going across that very first V. That's going to designate your first stitch. And then you might want to put one here at the last stitch, your last V. And make sure that you have 10 going across if you need, or whatever you need, whatever your pattern calls for, make sure you're counting and making sure that you have all of those stitches. And your stitch markers are not going to get in the way, you just move them when you need to move them. All right, so this is our tail here. That's going to hang down here, and that's just fine. That's not in our way. That is our tail, so never start working with your tail. So always make sure you're working with the yarn that's coming out of your skein here. All right, we're going to need to make our turning chain at the end of the row. All right, just like we did here when we turned to go back through this, we're going to need to make 1 chain because we're doing single crochets. So we're going to chain 1. So yarn over and pull through. All right, that is a chain right here. That's not going to count. So if you get confused, you might want to put a different color stitch marker on that stitch. So you do not go into that stitch just while you're learning. So we've done our chain 1. That's our turning chain for a single crochet. So we turn our work. All right, so now we're going to be working in the back side of this project. Okay, this is the back. This is the front, and this is the back. All right, and we have our stitch marker here that is in our turning chain, so we know we're not going to go into there. And then we have our stitch marker showing us where to go into our very first stitch. All right, so that's where we're going to be going in. And if that confuses you going into that, you can take that stitch marker out and do your first stitch and then replace it. So get your tail out of the way and get your working yarn here. Make sure you're working with the right yarn that's attached to your skein when you turn your work. And again, this is designating our turning chain, which we're not going to be going into that stitch. Right, so we're doing single crochets, so we're going to insert. We're not going to loop over first, we're going to insert. We're going to insert all the way through this first stitch, and we can identify the first stitch with the V. So if you need to turn your work and look at that V, that is that whole stitch right there. So we're going to, again, go into the center right here. And when we insert, we're going to make sure that we're picking up the 2 pieces of yarn here, not just the top of the yarn, the first stitch or the front stitch. That'll give you a different look. We're going to go right into that center and pick up both pieces of yarn of our V. So we're going to insert our yarn. We're going to yarn over, hook that yarn, pull it up, loop our yarn over, and pull through the 2 loops of yarn. That's a single crochet, and that is our first stitch of the row. For you beginners, get your stitch marker and put it right into that V. That's your first stitch. That way you're not dropping or adding stitches, okay? So that's our first stitch of this row. Again, we're going to go into the next stitch. I'm going to insert our hook. We're making sure that we're picking up the 2 pieces of yarn. Yarn over, pull through, pull up, yarn over, pull through those 2 loops. That's our second single crochet. Insert your hook right here. Go through that entire stitch, yarn over, pull through, pull up a little bit, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, insert your hook, yarn over, pull up through, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, insert your hook, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Again, we're going through that whole entire stitch. Now, if you were to only go into the very front loop, that would give you a ridge. If you were only to go into this back loop, that would give you a ridge. If you were to turn your work and only go into that back bump, that would give you a different look. But we're going into the whole entire stitch, that whole entire V. All right, so we're picking up that whole V when we're going into it. Loop, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2. So continue doing this until we get to the end of our stitches. So again, we're doing single crochets here. Insert, pull up, yarn over, pull through. Insert, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2. Here is our stitch marker showing us our very last V. See our V there? When we turn it towards us, we can see that V. This is our last stitch. So we're going into that last stitch, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull through 2. All right, so we have just done 10 single crochets. We can turn our work towards us and we can see those V's there. All right, so let's count the V's to make sure we haven't lost any stitches. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so this is our very first stitch here. And this is our very last stitch here. This V right here is our last stitch. So for you beginners, take your stitch marker out and put it into that last V right here. Now, if you do not have a stitch marker, you can use yarn, a safety pin, a bobby pin. I will show you. I'll take some scrap yarn here. Here's just a piece of yellow that I have. And you can take your darning needle and you can just put it right under that last stitch. And there it is. It's right there. Since we're going to move it every single row, it's okay that it's just hanging like that. Okay, that designates your last stitch. So we've got a marker on our first one and we've got a marker on our last one. So if you do not have a stitch marker, you can just use a piece of yarn, safety pin, anything that will go in there. So we're going to chain 1. That counts as our turning chain, which we are not going to count, and we are not going to be putting any stitch into that. That's going to bring us the height we need when we turn our work. So we're going to turn our work. All right, and we've got our yarn here designating our very first stitch is right there. That's where we're going into. So we're going to put a single crochet, insert your hook, pull up 1 loop, insert your hook, pull through 2 loops. Insert your hook, pull up 1 loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. All right, so we're just going to continue doing our single crochets all the way across this row. We're going to make sure that we have 10 when we get to the end. So insert your hook, yarn over, pull through 1 loop, yarn over, pull through 2. And see how everything is nice and loose, nothing is too tight. Insert your hook, yarn over, pull through 1 loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Insert your hook, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. Insert your hook, yarn over, pull up your loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So continue doing that all the way across until you get to the end. So here is our last stitch. See, that V is our stitch, and our stitch marker is right there. So we're going to insert, yarn over, pull up 1 loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Okay, there's our row of single crochets, and we can count them just to make sure. All right, we've got number 1 here, which we've either got to put a stitch marker. You can pull this out now. Here's our very first stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Our last V of the row is right here. Right there, there's our last stitch. So we take our stitch marker out and we move it up. And we put it right there on our very last stitch of the row. That way we don't lose that stitch. So we're going to insert our hook here. All right, so we've got our first stitch and our last stitch. That's going to help you beginners to have a nice clean edge, not drop or add stitches, because if you're going to drop or add stitches, it's probably going to be on the first one or the last one. All right, so we're continuing doing a single crochet. So we're going to do 1 more row of single crochets, and then we're going to change to a double crochet. So we've chained 1. We're not doing any stitches into that chain that we just made. If you want to bring your stitch marker that you designate your turning chain with, if that helps you, do that. So that was our chain. All right, so once we chain 1 for our single crochets, we're going to turn our work, and it doesn't really matter which way you turn your work at all. All right, so there is our turning chain. We're not going to go in there. We're going into here, which is our first stitch. So with a single crochet, you're going to insert first, yarn over, bring through 1 loop, yarn over, bring through those 2 loops. All right, and we can move our stitch marker up to that very first V. This is really handy, guys. If you're a beginner and you're adding or losing stitches, work with this stitch marker until you can identify what you're doing. So this is stitch number 1. We've got it identified. All right, and make sure you're working with the yarn that is attached to your skein of yarn. All right, we're doing another row of single crochets. So we insert first, insert, yarn over, pull through 1 loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So do single crochets all across this row. And you don't have to go fast. If you still need to go slow, that is fine. Just keep going at your pace. There is a fuzzy. So if you might have a little piece of fuzz like that in your yarn, you can just cut that out. All right, so we insert, pull through 2, insert, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2, insert, yarn over, pull 1, yarn over, pull through 2, insert, yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. All right, now here is our last stitch, our last V from the previous row, where our stitch marker is. We're going to insert right here where the stitch marker is. We're going to yarn over, pull up 1 loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, right? And we can look and make sure that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 V's, and we can move our stitch marker up and designate that very last V. Hook your stitch marker right there. All right, so now we're going to be doing double crochets on the next row. So a double crochet is a little bit taller than the single crochet, so we're going to need to chain up 2. So when we do our turning chain, we're going to chain 1, 2. So we chained 1 and chain 2. That's going to give us the height we need for this next stitch. Again, if you are a beginner and you want to designate that turning chain, put a stitch marker in that turning chain so you do not crochet into it. And you're going to turn your work. So now we have our stitch marker that's designating the first stitch of this row. And we've also got a stitch marker designating that turning chain, so we're not going to get confused with that one. Okay, so with a double crochet, we're going to yarn over before we go into the stitch. So yarn over to load that hook with your yarn. We're going to be going into the same stitch here that our stitch marker is into. Again, we're getting that full stitch. We're seeing 2 pieces of yarn. We're not just getting the top piece. We're going into that full stitch. We're going to yarn over and pull our yarn through and up. And it will look like we have 3 pieces of yarn on our hook. We're going to yarn over, pull through the first 2 pieces of yarn, and then you're going to have 2 loops on your hook. We're going to yarn over again and pull through 2 loops. That is a double crochet. All right, we're going to take our stitch marker out that designates our very first stitch, and we're going to put it in the V of that stitch that we just made. See that V? That's the top of our stitch. So we're putting our stitch marker in there. All right, that was 1 double crochet into the first stitch. Now we're going to make double crochets all the way across. So we're going to yarn over first with a double crochet. We're going to insert our hook right here. We're going through that whole entire V. Yarn over, pull through your loop. It's going to look like you have 3 loops on your hook at this point. We're going to yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops, yarn over, pull through this 2 loops that are on your hook. That is a double crochet. So yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up 1 loop. It'll look like you have 3 pieces of yarn there on your hook. Yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops, yarn over, pull through the second 2 loops, yarn over, insert into that stitch, yarn over, pull up 1 loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So you're doing a double crochet. So with a double crochet, you're always yarning over first. You pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Now, as you can see, the double crochet is taller than the single crochets. So we're going to yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So continue doing those double crochets all the way across at your own pace. Okay, here's our very last stitch right here. And this is designating our turning chain. So we're not going to go into there. It might be confusing and you might think, is this an extra stitch? It's not. That's why we use stitch markers. So this is designating our last V of the row. All right, so that's what we're going to go into. So if you're a new beginner, you might want to designate your turning chains so you don't get confused. So we're yarning over, we're going to go into that last V right here is our last stitch. So we're going to go into there, loop up, yarn over, come through, go through 2 loops, yarn over, and go through the last 2 loops. All right, so let's count our double crochets. So we've got our first one designated right here with the stitch marker. There's our first V right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is our last stitch, that V. This is our first V, our last V. So we're going to grab our stitch marker from the row before and we're going to insert it right into the top of that V. That's our last stitch. Okay. So we have 10 stitches. We haven't added and we haven't dropped any stitches. It can be very confusing for you beginners with this turning chain. We're not going into those. All right, so let's take off our turning chain marker from here. And again, you can use different color pieces of yarn. And I do sell stitch markers in my Etsy shop too also. All right, so we're at the end of the row, so we're going to be chaining 2 because we're doing double crochets, so we need that height of our turning chain. So we're chaining 2, and some people chain 3. It's just a personal preference. I like to chain 2. It's not as bulky. All right, we're going to put our turning chain stitch marker into our turning chain so we don't get that confused with our other stitches. All right, so use a different color yarn or a different type of stitch marker to designate. So we just chained 2 for our turning chain. We're going to turn our work. And right here, we know where we're going into because we have this marker designating our first stitch. All right, so that's where we're going into. We're not going to do anything with this first turning chain. We're going to yarn over. We're inserting our hook exactly where the stitch marker is. We're making sure we get that whole entire V, not just the front loop or the back loop. So we're yarning over, pulling through. It'll look like you have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops. Yarn over, pull through the last 2 loops. That's your very first stitch. So we're going to take our stitch marker off the row before and we're going to move it into that first V here. So that is going to designate our first stitch of the row, not to be confused with this turning chain. All right, so we've got 1 double crochet there. So we're going to yarn over, insert our hook here into our second stitch, yarn over, pull through 1 loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. We're going to continue this all the way around our row. I forgot to yarn over here. Yarn over, insert, pull up. If you don't see 3 pieces of yarn there, you've done something wrong. So you're pulling through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull up 1. You'll have 3 pieces of yarn there. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. See how everything is nice and not too loose, not too tight. And that takes practice. It will come with practice. So continue to be doing your double crochet stitches all the way across. And again, we're not only going into this front loop, and we're not only going into the back loop, we're going across that whole V. So we're going into the center. We're picking up that whole V right here. You can turn it towards you so you can see I've got that V there. So we're going to yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through 1. So you've got 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. If you ever mess up, you can take your hook out and just pull those stitches back to where you need to insert your hook again if you need to fix anything. All right, we're going to go into here and just continue across doing the same thing you've been doing. Okay, so we have our last stitch right here. That's our last V. Okay, not to be confused with this turning chain. We're ignoring that. All right, that's what gets people into trouble. All right, so we're going to yarn over. We're going into that last V. We're going to do our last double crochet there. Okay. All right, so down here we were doing single crochets, and we've just did 2 rows of double crochets. All right, so you have these double crochet posts right here. All right, so we've got 2 rows of double crochets there. So let's say we want to stop right there. What do? We're going to do 1 more chain. All right, and we're going to pull our yarn through our loop a little bit. We're going to take our scissors. We're going to cut our yarn. We're not going to cut it too close here. We're going to make sure that we have a good 5-6 inches because we want to make sure that we're going to have enough to weave in our ends. So once you've done that extra chain, you can pull your hook through your work like this. And because we did our chain here, that is our little knot. All right, so that is going to fasten off our work right there. Okay, and we can take off our stitch markers if we're done. If this was a blanket and we were doing all double crochets, it's going to be so nice and straight because we're not putting stitches into our turning chains. Okay, those are there to designate our turning chains, so we can take those off. We can take off our stitch markers for our first stitch and our last stitch and our turning chains on either end. All right. So that is going to be how it's going to look, and it's going to be so nice and straight. Look how nice and straight those look. All right, so what we're going to do, so we've already knotted off our end of our work here, and we have our tail from where we first started. So we've got our beginning tail and our ending tail here. All right, so we're going to need to weave in our ends. So we're going to take our darning needle and we're going to designate the front and the back of the work. So your front of the work is going to look like this. It's going to have those V's laid out right here nicely. The back of the work is going to have more of this line going across, and it's going to show the back of your stitches right here. So maybe this side is not as pretty as this side. So this is the front. where your stitches are going to lay here with your chains that you did. And then the back is just not going to look as pretty here. It's going to have where the back of the stitches are here. All right, but if you're doing a blanket, it really doesn't matter. Let's take one of our tails and we're going to insert it into the loop here of our darning needle. And this is why we leave a long enough tail for us to work with. All right, so we're on the back side of our work. So just designate which side you think looks better than the other side. So I think this side looks better than this side. So this is the back side. We have our darning needle with our tail, and you're just going to go into your work here just on this side of your work. You're not going to go straight through so that you see it coming out here. You're just going to go right on these top stitches so that when you put your darning needle in here, see how you're not seeing it on the front side? We're working on the back side. All right, so you're just going to go in here and take your darning needle and just slip it underneath the very top of a few stitches. This is the back side of our work. Again, when you turn this over, you're not going to see it. We're working on the back, only the tops. So pull your yarn through here, the very top of the stitches, and then you're going to turn your work, angle your work so you can go this way. And we're not going to go back where we just came through because that would undo our work. We're going to skip over something, skip over a part of yarn that you see. And we're going to go into the top of here. All right, and there's no right or wrong way to do the weaving in your ends. Just going to go underneath, again, the tops of these stitches. So it's not going to go all the way through your work. All right, so you're going to just weave in your darning needle here, push it through, and you're not going to distort your stitches by pulling it way too tight. You're just going to have it just be enough so it doesn't pull any of those stitches. If you pull it too tight, just go back and loosen that up. All right. Turn your work around again. And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to skip these first couple stitches. You're going to go over those and into the next few stitches. You're going to do the same thing. You're only going into the top. And pull your darning needle through. Again, don't pull it too tight so that you distort your work. And we're going to cut off that extra. Okay. And we're going to weave in this end. So again, we're going to look to see where we want the front of our work to be. Depending on how many stitches you did, it could be different for you, but just designate the front and the back. If you ever get confused, you can just sort of put a stitch marker somewhere on the front of your work, right? And then you're going to work on the back. So we're going to load up our darning needle again with our yarn. And we're going to just weave in right here because we're working with our double crochets. And again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. I sort of just go into the stitches where I think it's not going to show. So you're going to go in a few stitches. Again, we're not going all the way through our work. Just picking up a few stitches here, pulling through, skip over some stitches, go back through, just on the tops. And I like to go back and forth 3 times. So that was 2. Here's our 3rd time going across. Again, we're working only on the surface of these stitches. We're not pulling too tight to they distort, and we're going to cut off our work. Now, if you cut your tail too short when you were making your tails, you can always go in with the back of your darning needle and grab that yarn to pull it through if you didn't give yourself long enough for the tail. So here's our front of our work. If you need to designate it with a stitch marker, you can do that. And let's look at our little sample here. Isn't it so cute? We've got our single crochet rows here, and then we've got our double crochet rows. So I hope this tutorial has helped you. I hope your little sample looks as cute as this one. If it does not, do not worry. Just practice making little samples like this. Do not practice on doing a huge project until you sort of get your tension right and you know what you're doing. You can just do this. And if you want to keep practicing, instead of tying off your work, just take it apart and do another little sample. Do them over and over again until you can get your tension correct. And look how nice these edges look. And don't be afraid of using your stitch markers. So I hope this tutorial has helped you, and watch for more.